Hello, Professor Katya. I see you just joined.
Hi, Olga. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
And yes. Okay. So now we have a quorum of the different panelists. So our fourth panelist will be delayed until 10 a.m. So until then, we're going to start with our three members. So everyone can see my screen. So thank you everyone for attending our little panel discussion on AI ontologies and the next generation of researchers. This was originally intended to be a workshop for PhD students and other early career researchers to get a sense of what to do with this changing landscape of AI research, especially with ontologies looking to be a key part of making sense of that.
Sovereignty, I think you're muted.
Apologies. How long was I muted for?
No,
30 seconds, maybe
Okay.
30 seconds.
So, okay. So right now, I would like to introduce the three panelists that we have here. The first we have is Professor Katia Pesquita, who works at the University of Lisbon. I apologize for using the English form. She is Associate Professor in the Computer Science Department and is currently the Vice Director of their Large-Scale Informatics Systems Laboratory and heading up the Health and Bioinformatics research. Second, we have Professor Oliver He, who is an associate professor at the University of Laboratory Animal Medicine and at the Departments of Microbiology and Immunology. I also have the honor of him serving as my primary PhD mentor for the last 5 years. So he is very great. Sorry. And last member that we currently have here is Professor Paul Schofield, who works at the University of Cambridge. He is also serving as I do apologize since I'm not sure if this counts as a knighthood or just recognized by the MSRB.
Sorry, say that again. Yeah, there was a.
Yeah, so who's recognized as MSRB for your contributions in biology and science, and
yes, yeah, the Royal Society of Biology thing. Yeah, it's
yes. So I wasn't sure if that counted as a knighthood or just royal
no,
recognition.
no. but thank you for the flattery. But no, sadly, no, not a knighthood. Although they're not very popular these days either, actually.
Okay. And yes, our last member who will join in later is Chris Mungle, who's head of the works at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He is responsible for a lot of work with gene ontology, amongst any other projects. I'm a PhD student at the University of Michigan, and Olga is likewise that at King Abdullah University of Science and Technology. Okay, the agenda for today. We're going to do a brief introduction, but I was thinking that we would transition to asking some general career questions and using that as an opportunity for each of the panelists to explain, introduce themselves more, and then explain what's going on. And then we will swap between Olga and I on different themes of questions when it comes to real-world ontology use before discussing more with roles with agents, LLMs, asking community ethics, and then leaving the back 20 minutes to deal with audience Q&A or to allow the presenters to show off any other projects in order to illustrate what they're doing with AI, the large language models. Any questions? Okay. If that is all, I think we can begin. So, Olga, I believe you are starting us off with the first set of questions. And just let me stop sharing my screen and highlight, spotlight each of this. Okay, we're good.
Thank you, Anthony, for the introduction. And so we would like to start our discussion with some general career questions. And so my first question is, just to warm up the conversation, is could you please tell us how did you first learn about ontologies, and why did you choose to join this field at the very beginning? Maybe we can start with Professor Katya. So could you please share a little bit?
Okay, that is a very interesting question, and I'm trying to remember. I can recall the year, but maybe not exactly the month, but it was 20 years ago while I was doing my master's in bioinformatics. I was very lucky to attend a seminar by the researcher who would afterwards become both my master's and PhD advisor, Francisco Couto. And he gave a presentation on gene ontology. And I was immediately, it was really a key moment in my research and in my life as a scientist, because I was originally trained as a biologist. And after a year in the lab, I quickly understood that the laboriousness and detail-oriented, also the ability to wait a long time to get your aha moment, was not going to work for me. And at the same time, I taught myself programming, and I thought, okay, maybe I can use this new skill to speed up data analysis. And then I enrolled in the bioinformatics course. And then that day, when I saw that seminar by Professor Francisco, it was really eye-opening, because it was a way to connect so many of my passions. So it was a way to connect my passion for the life sciences and for knowledge in the life sciences. It was a way to connect it to computer science and artificial intelligence and data. But it was also a way to connect it to two other, let's call them hobbies of mine, philosophy and especially epistemology, and the way we learn and investigate, and the science of science, and also a little bit of languages and linguistics, and this way to how to name things and how to make sense of the things that there are in the world through language, but also through logic. And it kind of tied everything together in this beautiful idea that are ontologies. And that was the first time that I heard about ontologies. And in that day, I decided that that was what I wanted to do for my research for my master's. And that was the beginning of this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a truly inspiring story. Thank you very much for sharing this, your personal experience. And um, mm, what about you, Professor Oliver? So, how did you join this field?
Yeah, thank you. So I think, yeah, it was a coincidence to me. I don't know, because I got my PhD in well lab, right, immunology, and then I got my master degree after my PhD in computer science, and then I worked at the Virginia Bioinformatics Institute for 3 years, and then I joined the University of Michigan. So, so that time I was working on my well lab, Brucella is bacteria, Brucella research, and then my bioinformatics. I was developing a violin, which is a vaccine database. And then I got invitation from Dr. Barry Smith and Lindsay Crowell. They say, oh, they are having infectious disease ontology idle meeting in Cold Spring Harbor. in New York. So they would have invited me to join the meeting. So I said, oh yeah, okay, I'm going. So yeah, actually, it's in the meeting I was very kind of just into the ontology field quickly. So that time there were a lot of famous people like Michael Ashburner actually is the first author of the gene ontology. Like he was a professor in Cambridge University, as I know. So he actually initiated the gene ontology development. So he told us how to develop ontology, like 10 principles. And one thing I remember is like, okay, you don't have to be a big group, right? It can be a small group in developing ontology and many other things. So in the 2 day, 3 day, 2 or 3 day meeting, in the end of the session, right? And then I said, oh, my lab is developing the violin, the vaccine database or vaccine knowledge base. We are getting all the data. So I would like to develop a vaccine ontology, right? To kind of integrate my data. And then they all like it. Say, oh yeah, go ahead. So actually, it initiated my career of ontology development. So I have been working on this since then. So yeah, I think it's 2007. So I was still wondering why I was invited, right, to the meeting. Well, no, I was working as in my postdoc. I developed something called PIMO, pathogen information markup language. So yeah, it's not ontology, but it's a markup language. It's XML format. It was published in Bioinformatics Journal. So I think probably that's one reason they asked me. But anyway, so and then another thing I want to mention is like one day Barry Smith told me, oh, Oliver, if you want to do some ontology research for your career, you should do something. Well, I didn't know the remaining part, but I just say, oh, when he mentioned that I can use ontology for my career, I was kind of it was a sudden feeling to me, like, oh, really? I can use ontology for my career development. But indeed, it turned out that ontology is a bigger part of my career now, actually, after almost 20 years now. Okay, but anyway, that's my story. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, yeah, for your story as well. Yeah, some big things may just start with some random meeting. Yeah, probably it also happened to me, I think. Yeah, and Professor Paul, could you please also share why you started working with ontologists? When did you start to work with them?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a shaggy dog story, really, and sort of started off looking for a solution to a problem. But going back to 1998, actually, is when I first started working on ontology. And at the time, I was working with an international group on mouse pathology, particularly mouse radiation pathology. And the group, which was well established, led from Munich, had published a book of very high quality photomicrographs of histopathological lesions. And that book was coming to the end of its print run. And so people said, well, we need to make another book. And so it's hard to cast your mind back to how people thought in those days. But we came up with the then quite unusual suggestion that rather than printing a book, we should actually make a database and have images online, which would then make it into an open-ended book, if you like, a book to which people could contribute. And talking to a colleague of mine, Jonathan Bard, I said, yeah, we're going to set off and get a project to put this database online. I said, what you need is an ontology. And I had absolutely no idea what he was talking about at the time. And that was really because Jonathan had been talking to Mike Ashburner. And Jonathan, like myself, is also a developmental biologist. And people were starting to think about capturing information about developmental biology, as well as the kind of things which were going into gene ontology. And of course, there's quite a lot of developmental process and things in gene ontology. And so we wrote a grant to the European Commission to develop an ontology, which started in 1999. And that was, I think, probably about the third, because these things don't have set start dates. The gene ontology was certainly the first, but Janan Epig was beginning to write the mouse anatomy ontology at the Jackson Laboratory. And the mouse pathology ontology, I think, was the third biological ontology. And we put together a committee of pathologists. And we spent years, and in fact, the process is actually now much slower because, to a large extent, the ontology is effectively, in terms of its uses, complete. But we spent at least 5 years with a committee of expert pathologists reviewing terms, writing definitions. So the mouse pathology ontology is completely manually, expertly curated. And once we had empath running, then it was well, depending on how you look at it, either a downward or an upward spiral, and we got more and more involved in ontology. Ontologies got much more sophisticated. We could all write oboe format ontologies on a piece of paper if we wanted, and obviously that's all changed now. But yeah, so I got into ontology basically on the basis of looking for something to solve a problem, but actually also by looking completely across different fields, and again, chance meetings, chance discussions.
Yes, thank you very much for sharing this. Yeah, it's also very inspiring and yeah, very impressive. And so, Anthony, you do have some time to another question. So, yeah, we had quite many.
Okay, so I actually want to build on that, since one of the questions that I wanted to ask is, so you describe that as a solution looking for a problem. But for the rest of you, what are some other problems that you and your research have solved by using ontology? So I sort of got an answer from you, Paul, so I apologize, but
You want an answer from me? Oh,
no, you gave a partial answer.
Okay,
So I'm asking
right, Katia, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I understood the question. Can you rephrase that for me?
Okay, so it's more of a question of what kind of research questions that you have personally used ontology as part of your career to solve.
Oh.
Or, yes.
Okay, that for me may be in two complementary approaches, I would say, because some of my research uses ontologies as objects of study. So I study ontologies and not use ontologies to address some other research question. My research question is about ontologies themselves. And then another part of my research, I use ontologies to address research questions in other areas. So let me start with the second one and give you an example, and then I'll give you an example for the first one. So in the second one, and here I can tell you about recent EU-funded projects that we are working on, is that the revolution in AI for science and health that deep learning and, of course, language models have brought about in the last couple of years, or maybe it's already been 3.5 years actually, has shed light on some of the limitations that this paradigm of scalability is all you need. And as long as you have sufficient data and sufficient compute and sufficiently sophisticated algorithms, you can learn whatever there needs to be learned, and you can predict whatever there needs to be predicted, actually faces a number of very, very difficult challenges if you want to have something that is more complex than ordering from Uber or selecting what is the next, TV series you want to binge on. So in our work in scientific discovery, especially in the life sciences and in supporting personalized medicine discoveries, what we have found is that although there is some merit to algorithms that are able to ingest, whole genome data sets to predict, what is the best cancer drug to recommend to a patient, they all have one very strong limitation when it comes to deployment in the real world. None of these algorithms are explainable or interpretable. And there is no way to convince a medical doctor or a researcher that whatever these algorithms are predicting makes sense, is safe, you can trust it, and actually, in the case of scientific research, contributes to, accruing to your body of knowledge. So what we have been using ontologies for is in kind of two tasks here. So one task is to support the explainability of these outcomes. And here we are not supporting the explainability of the deep learning algorithms themselves, but rather using the ontologies as a sort of symbolic validator of the outcome that the black box algorithm is outputting. So what we use the ontologies for is to understand if we add that statement that is being predicted by the deep learning algorithm to a knowledge graph that contains, tens, upwards. Let me tell you an example. So in one project that we're doing this, we have a knowledge graph with 32 biomedical ontologies that are fully aligned and describe the patient data that we have. And then what we can do is looking at everything that we know about the patient, the annotations of that patient to the body of knowledge encoded in the ontologies, and that small link, the triple that is predicted in the patient knowledge graph, that is the recommended drug. If we add that to the graph, first, does it make sense? Second, can we find, paths through the ontology that afford a mechanistic explanation for why that drug is a good drug for the patient? So we are looking for mutations that the patient has, how these mutations are related to protein expression, enzyme activity, are the drugs involved in enzyme inhibition? So mechanistic explanations that can be extracted from this very, very ontology-rich knowledge graph. So later on, maybe I will have some time to discuss the today's vision of what a knowledge graph is, and everything, nearly everything can be a knowledge graph, and how I think what a knowledge graph is. So it's knowledge first and not graph first. But we can discuss this later today. And so we use it to find these validating explanations. So they are not actually explanations of how the deep learning works, but they are explanations of why that prediction makes sense, taking into account the body of knowledge that we have. And so that is one aspect. And the other aspect is knowledge injection into the deep learning algorithms. So this scalability solves everything approach is not sufficient, especially in areas where actually getting more data is very expensive or impossible, or you can't access more data because it's patient private data and there are silos and privacy and rules and laws. And so there are serious troubles to just thinking that scale will solve everything. And by injecting ontology level knowledge into these deep learning approaches, we have been able to also improve their performance in recommending cancer drugs. So that is one way how we use ontologies to kind of solve a real world problem of using AI in a healthcare context. And then I have my other types of research questions, the research questions about ontology. So that was my PhD, and it's been a long time since my PhD, but maybe for the students, it may be interesting to go back and tell you a little bit that story. And so what I was interested in during my PhD is understanding, is the way that we update an ontology a good way to detect scientific research trends? So can we, by tracking the updates to an ontology that records scientific results, can we understand what are the trends, what are the topics? Can I even predict which are going to be the topics that will see more research being done about them and more updates in the ontology? So kind of studying how ontologies are built, how they are updated to understand, how science is evolving was one of the questions that I had during my PhD. So I think those are kind of two examples of that. I don't know if this kind of went into what you were looking for, Anthony. I hope so.
No, it's a good segue for especially with the focus of using ontologies as a tool to make sense of AI and preventing the black box from being people who use LLMs as more like priests or interpreters of this mystery thing that gives you answers, and scientists who actually understand what's going on and can make sense of it. So, thank you. Oliver, do you have anything you also want to add?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with what Katia has said. Yes. So for me, in addition to it, I want to say I have used the first ontology we developed is the vaccine ontology. So it was proposed to initially like integrate our vaccine database data. So we have a lot of data, right? You consider the vaccine basically, it's like you have to classify a vaccine. You can have tens of thousands of vaccines, and then you classify them, and then for each vaccine you have the components, right? It can be antigen or adjuvant or vector, a lot of things, and then there are immune responses and mechanism. So actually, then quickly you can go on and make it very complicated. So we use the vaccine ontology to classify those kind of things. Definitely is a wonderful experience. And then later on, we use it for different applications. So one major one, for sure, is the virtual mining. So we show, okay, we can use the ontology to support all kinds of virtual mining ways, right? To standardize data, to enhance the prediction results. So for example, if you can compare with PubMed, right? PubMed uses mesh. For example, if you look for some like a live attenuated vaccine or Brucella vaccines, so you quickly find your ontology actually increase performance like maybe 50-fold more higher efficacy compared to just a PubMed search. Why? Because PubMed is based on the mesh and then our search based on the vaccine ontology. And the vaccine ontology defines the live attenuated vaccines in a more richer way, right? In much richer way. So, and we published a paper in a journal article. And then later on, I would say another very impressive effort that we have been working on is the cell line ontology. So there are like our cell line ontology has over 10,000 or 20, 30,000 cell lines in in the certain, it was initially my PhD student, Sarah's work. So initially, she developed a cell line database, and then later on, we converted it into ontology. And that time, several efforts are going on, like the European Bioinformatics Institute, EBI. They developed something called the EFO, right? Experimental factor ontology. So it includes a lot of cell lines and many other, like ATCC, many other kind of resources, communities. They have their own index of cell lines. But then in the end, we say, oh, we should join forces, right, to make it a more kind of comprehensive and systematic and integrated way. So then we put all forces together, but we don't have ATCC join us. But like all like EBI, EFO join us. So we developed the cell line ontology and make it a very clean way. So definitely, and it supports a lot of things like data integration and standardization. And later on, there was the Linux project, and I actually founded the Linux project. Then they say, oh, we like your work, right? Then they found us for a couple more years to make our cell line ontology richer and integrated and supporting their Linux project. So another thing I would like to say is, what is ontology, right? So ontology is basically, so what's the difference between the philosophical ontology and the informatics ontology, right? So ontology is more like metaphysics in a philosophical sense, right? From Aristotle. So, and the metaphysics actually is the origin of science, right? The logical-based one. And then we come to now, right? This is very definitely very advanced science and technology here. So actually, I come from China. So in China, no, they have their ancient philosophy. So it's more like yin and yang, right? Yin and yang philosophy. And then, unfortunately, they didn't develop into more like a solid logical-based certains, like the science, Western field, or Western medicine. So I'm kind of thinking what's going on there, right? So the yin and yang actually, then they have the 5 elements theory, and actually it becomes the kind of theory under the traditional Chinese medicine. The traditional Chinese medicine has been used for over a couple thousand years at least. So it seems like it's working, but why is working while meanwhile, it lacks logic, right? That's a dilemma here. So actually, yesterday I presented a talk. I say, okay, maybe we can think about the root of the thinking the ontology as a philosophy. So can we basically use the logical-based ontology certain to ontologize the traditional Chinese medicine, the yin and yang and the 5 elements, right? Because if we can, basically, we can modelize the ancient Chinese philosophy. Things is used for guiding the traditional Chinese medicine, which is still being popular. And the ontologization hopefully can make the foundation of the traditional Chinese medicine more modern, more logical, right? So it may have more power, right, for the integrative work of the traditional Chinese medicine and Western medicine. So that kind of idea. So this idea is like to use the ontology to more like standardize the ancient philosophy. I think potentially it can be very useful. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your answer. Yes. I did want to ask a brief follow-up to Paul before Olga takes over talking about more with AI and large language models. So both of you are giving like good use cases of stuff that you're going with ontology and some potential impact that you hope your ontologies to deal with and solve. So my question for Paul in like the next few minutes is that do you have any advice for researchers that are trying to find a situation of where can I find real world impact for an ontology? How can I find something that outside of the ontology community, people will be interested in what it can do?
That's a tricky one. You don't want to be in the situation where you have a hammer, and then once you have that hammer, everything looks like a nail, because that hammer might not be the best tool for putting a screw in. And so to say, well, here I have a tool, and I'm going to look around for something to use it, is definitely what you should not be doing. And I think that this is a bit of a problem, because you say, well, what do you do? Well, I do ontology. I do ontologies, but and then I kind of use these to look at use what I do to look at other people's problems. That just tends to generate work which is not terribly interesting. So my strong advice is work closely with people who are doing things which you find interesting. I've been very, very fortunate in that. I mean, I'm here sort of. Although Katya, you also trained as a biologist, didn't you? But I'm basically coming from the background of being still predominantly a biologist and a geneticist, with a big interest in model organisms and in clinical medicine. But what's really good for me has actually been to work with computer scientists, actually to find people who I work with very well, and I can talk to them about some of my problems, and then they can tell me whether they think that what they do might be adopted or adapted into looking at those problems. And so it rather grows organically, rather than saying, here I have a tool and I now want to apply it to something. And you'll be able to do work that way. You'll be able to generate papers that way, but it's not likely to be interesting. And I think it's far more interesting to cross disciplines and just talk to people and set up real collaborations, rather than go and flogging your tools, as it were. So I'm for very interdisciplinary forums for meeting people. So we had this very much at the Turing Institute in previous years, when we had some very good fora where we had computer scientists and clinicians basically all rammed together in the same room with lots of beer. And that is a good way of actually pushing forward the science.
Okay, thank you. And I believe it's now Olga's turn to ask about the AIs and LLMs. So.
Yes, thank you, Anthony. Yeah, let's move to this topic that's a very hot topic nowadays. So I want to start maybe with the theme that there is a lot of excitement around generative AI, agentic AI nowadays. And my question is, how should early career researchers balance this excitement of rapidly evolving AI methods with the slower, careful process of ontology development and curation? And so what should younger researchers focus on? Mastering traditional ontology engineering, or prioritize AI-driven knowledge systems? And what can and should be automated, and what shouldn't? And maybe Professor Oliver, you could start with sharing your thoughts about this.
So you mean like the AI, right? The general AI, how, yeah. So I think because actually people have different opinions. So one say is like, oh yeah, with the AI, we don't need ontology. I mean, to me, actually, it's the opposite. To me, with the AI, actually, ontology will show more powerful use, right? So first of all, ontology is part of AI, right? So ontology basically is a field is critical for the branch of AI called knowledge representation and reasoning, right? So people call the like knowledge KR, and so it's part of AI. So basically, it's like let the AI or the artificial intelligence understand, the meaning of a term. So that's the key actually. Like in older days, every single AI lab they need to develop some ontology, but it's very small. And then later on, with the bigger data, you need to have an ontology interoperable, so you get your ontology bigger and bigger. So it's more or less like AI lab uses. And then, as I mentioned earlier, so basically, like a large language model, to give you more like a black box thing, right? So you give a question and to give you answer, but you don't know how the answer comes from. So then an ontology can actually be the one to kind of identify the mechanism, right? To give you the foundation of the mechanism. So and just another one, it's like it's not instead of black box, it basically give you mechanism. Just and then ontology actually enhance the AI, right? Like through the RAG mechanism. So I just stop here now. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, yes, indeed, if we want to build a true artificial intelligence, we would want to introduce some logic into its structure, and yeah, like humans do, for example. Professor Paul, could you please also share some your vision of this problem?
I've got quite strong views on this, which I think maybe mostly overlap with Oliver's actually. I mean, my first caveat is don't be kind of bowled along by the enthusiasm that everybody else is having with generative AI. There are vast and fundamental problems in the way that generative AI is being done at the moment, and we're fighting people who are basically trying to push up their share prices, and so we need to actually have a very cool approach when it comes to this. There are two kind of points of interaction with.
Oh, you froze.
We lost
I first of
Paul,
all
right?
start
Okay.
I think so, yeah.
develop in the future. I'm going the same. Did you ditch out?
Okay.
Ditching out.
So
we
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm sorry, Professor Paul. I think you were just frozen a little bit.
Yeah. Hear me now.
mm,
Great.
would you want to restart and we jump to like counting out to answer the question, and then once your Wi-Fi is able, you can give your answer? Because right now I'm a bit wide.
Well, yes, yeah. Sorry for this. Maybe we can just move on. And yes, just wait for a little bit for Professor Paul to stable his internet connection.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, yes, so wanted to address this question to Professor Katja. And I think I also have sort of maybe some special questions since you work with explainability. And so, well, LLMs and LLM-based agents are powerful, but sometimes unreliable or inconsistent because of hallucinations and some other things. And so, in your opinion, what role should ontologies play in ensuring correctness, traceability, and explainability in AI-driven systems? Yeah, how can we integrate ontologies with LLMs to preserve the best of both worlds, let's say?
Thank you. And thank you for the add-on questions. I'm going to pick up the first question first. And I'm going to take a radically more pragmatic approach than Oliver was taking. And I think Paul was also going to be a little bit more philosophical in his answer. And I'm actually going to interpret your question of how can a student balance everything that's going on right now and the speed at which everything is changing. And so I'm going to take it in a bit of a more pragmatic view. So my first recommendation is that it is very important that someone who is, an early career researcher or PhD student in the area of ontologies makes an effort in understanding how large language models work and how these models work and how they are trained and fine-tuned and how they are trained with reinforcement learning to avoid making some obvious mistakes. And understanding a little bit how it works is essential so that you can understand.
Are we back?
Paul is back. I had just started talking while we were waiting for you to come back, but I just started. So if you want to continue, I would be happy to pick up later. I was just starting.
I just a couple of things very quickly, really. I mean, the first is that until we've actually got, I mean, the big problem with generative AI is it needs to have ground truths and constraints. And without ground truth semantics and constraints, then actually generative AI will continue to generate garbage. So those ground truths and constraints are going to have to come from ontologies or ontology-like artifacts. And I would also say at this point that I think that a lot of the ontologies that are going to be developed are going to be developed in a different way from the way we've traditionally done it, and really be put together in a different way. So I think that we're going to be seeing changes in the way we make ontologies to apply to this kind of ground truth and constraints from LLMs. So I think that's in that direction. The other direction, people are itching to use generative AI to build ontologies. What I've seen so far simply adds to the general slop. And we already have a problem with ontologies, particularly where construction is automatically or semi-automatically done, producing artifacts which are not only not useful, but possibly counterproductive. So for anything, any kind of ontology or knowledge graph, which depends on the structure of that knowledge graph for its use, without proper curation, is just going to generate noise. And so I think that the reverse, not just using ontologies to deal with Gen AI, but actually using Gen AI to build ontologies, I think that actually is potentially quite problematical. And so I think we have to think very, very carefully about that kind of cross relationship.
Yes, yeah, thank you. And yeah, Professor Kata, maybe you could also talk a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just mentioning that I was going to take a more pragmatic approach to answering this question from the point of view of a student or an early career researcher on how they can keep up with the speed at which it appears that everything is changing. So I was starting to give out a little bit of advice, is that you do need to learn how these methods and these algorithms work. You don't need to understand, very, very in-depth everything, but you need to understand how they work so that you can understand their limitations and also the opportunities to see where ontologies can come in and fit. So Paul was just mentioning constraints, right? Making sure that the answers that these models are giving follow our intentions, and the way to communicate his intentions is through something that is an ontology or that looks a lot like an ontology. Of course, this brings here another challenge, which is should we then sacrifice learning how to properly build an ontology by hand? I am going to say that those skills are going to be very much in demand, actually, because as Paul was saying, what we have been seeing is that if it's a very simple, taxonomy thing that you can extract from a text, I think that language models are going to be there for you. But the kinds of ontologies that I actually think that right now language models can build are not ontologies that language models then can benefit from to constrain them or improve their work. Because if they can build the ontology, it's because they can understand it, and then you don't need to build that ontology and then show it to the language model. It might, in some situations, improve a little bit the performance due to technical issues with context window sizes, and so it may make sense that we kind of summarize world knowledge into an ontology too. But that's a more technical aspect than anything else. So I'm going to say that the importance of proper ontology engineering is, if anything, raising. And if you remember from my first, or rather second intervention, I was saying, okay, because everybody calls anything a knowledge graph these days, right? And there are many, many papers out there, even from very large companies, that are trying to automatically extract knowledge graphs from large corpus of text, and then feedback that information through a retrieval augmented generation approach. If you don't know what that means, please let me know in the chat and I can give you a 10-second introduction to the topic. But so in a very simple terms, in a way that the language model can query and extract information from. And then it's like this Ouroboros where you get the knowledge graph out of the language model and then input it back again. And what we've been seeing here is that although it is a good way to handle context window size limitations, it is a very bad way to discover the true ground rules that govern the domain that you're trying to model in this way. And this is, of course, due to two things. First, texts don't tell the whole story. There is a lot of implicit knowledge that humans have that they don't pour out into paper when they're writing, their technical document for their company. Because, everybody knows what the company produces, so we don't need to explain what our product is when we're writing our tech document. And so all of those things that are fundamental when you're designing an ontology, really understanding all of the concepts in your domain and how they are related to each other and what rules can be established to model this world view, they are missing from many of these documents that are being, transformed into a knowledge graph and then fed back. So I do think that there's a value there to handle one limitation of current language models, which is context size, but the constraints, the rules, the guidance, and sometimes you don't really need strict rules, but you need some sort of guidance because, of course, an ontology, as good as it is always going to be incomplete and then evolving, and then it's just a consensus of the people who build it, and then you bring another person on and you get a different idea. So, I mean, it's not truth, but it is a really nifty way to model a domain and what we know at one given point. And we will need to have more sophisticated ways, not to just build ontologies, but to evolve them if we want them to become part of this toolkit of the agentic AI of the future. And as Oliver was saying, ontologies are part of AI, and it is, I think we're going a little bit full circle in a sense, and going back to Minsky's idea of the society of the mind, where you would have all of these agents and all of them would, you know, process things differently and use different paradigms for learning and for interacting with the world. And I think we might be going forward in that sense. And I think that ontologies will be a very important part of the toolkit of that AI of the future.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, yeah, indeed, we need to go to build some maybe neurosymbolic agent, kind of, we can integrate ontologies, knowledge graphs, and some logical based approaches with statistical learning. Yeah, and there is one question in the chat, but maybe we can get back a little bit later. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. I think, yeah, Anthony, you can maybe go to your questions. Yeah, thank you.
That's actually a decent segue to something I want to ask about the community, which is that we're talking about ontologies as being core. We have some of the concerns of ontologies not being properly constructed when we try to use generative AI or integrate generative AI or as methods of taming from that. So one thing I want to ask the panelists is that with the rise of Gen AI and agentic AI, how do we make sure that the ontologies and other knowledge resources remain sustainable, it remains fair, and we actually maintain them, keep them up to date, instead of having like more periods of development and then maybe a burst of development, but otherwise being relatively static once we're done developing it?
Yeah, I would think with AI, the ontology can be developed faster, right? And hopefully more consistent. So then they should help each other. So I would expect because before, in the last couple of decades, ontology needs a lot of careful manual thinking and addition. So with AI, you would think we can add them in a master in a quicker way. So hopefully more effective way is going, I would think, very fast in the direction now.
Also, Oliver, I apologize to interrupt you. I just want to greet Chris Mungle for finally showing up. Originally, we scheduled this for 10 a.m. and that's why there was a delay. It was a scheduling goof on our end that led to this being moved forward. So, yeah, sorry.
Hi, everyone. Happy to join you.
Hi, Chris.
Right. It's good. But yeah, right now we're discussing what we need to do in order to keep ontologies and knowledge graphs fair and maintained over time with all the rise of like Gen AI and agentic AI. So
absolutely, yeah.
Okay, sorry, Oliver, please resume.
Yeah, I'm done actually. So I think you asked the relation between AI and ontology, right? So definitely, I think ontology can support AI, and the AI should also support the ontology development and applications as well.
Okay. So I'll actually direct this motion to Chris since you just showed up for what's going on. So one thing that I have also been thinking about is that with the ontology community, and we have these also tools, is there any potential in using generative AI as a teaching tool in order to get people more involved or more capable of understanding how to work with ontologies or use that?
I mean, I think there's probably a great potential there. I think, the narrative right now around agentic AI is that it's going to make it a little bit harder for people who are just, starting out, So I think there's a very strong narrative in agentic AI and kind of like vibe coding and software engineering at the moment. And I think a lot of what we're hearing over there applies also to sorry, getting some kind
of those Christmas sweaters coming out before too long. I know we have a couple
Christmas sweaters.
Okay.
So yeah, I know. I think kind of like vibe coding has really, taken the kind of like the software engineering world by storm. There's a lot of discussion right now about whether, how accurate this is. But I think a lot of people who've a lot of experience with software development are finding these tools kind of incredibly helpful. But it does take that bit of experience to use them effectively to be able to kind of like see where they go down rabbit holes or where they make mistakes or things like that. And we've had a lot of success in the ontology development community by taking a lot of software engineering tools and then bringing them over and use not necessarily the tools themselves, but the methodologies and taking them over and using them for ontology development. And we've actually had a lot of success in taking agentic AI coding tools like Claude Code and so on, and just applying them to ontology development. And they actually work really well. It takes a bit of experience to be able to kind of give them the sufficient context that they need, the kind of like the guardrails, all of the tools that we've developed to apply reasoning over ontologies, using tools like Robot to apply checks over ontologies, turn out to be absolutely essential guardrails for using agentic AI. But it is very, very, very effective. But this does kind of like pose a bit of a problem for kind of like education and getting trained up in ontology development, because sometimes it really does take a few years in the trenches of building an ontology and working with the users of ontologies to really understand that kind of connection between what the business needs, so to speak, of the ontology are and the actual kind of like ontology development methodologies. But I think we're going to see more and more tools that are aimed not just at having an agent go off and do a task for you and kind of hand you the end results, but an agent that will actually kind of like work with you and kind of like walk you through the task that you're doing. And this is actually an approach you can use right now with kind of ChatGPT or anything like that. It's like, rather than just ask it to give you the answer, ask it to kind of like walk you through, the steps that it took to kind of like achieve that answer. And even now, I think like yesterday or last week, there's a new release of kind of Notebook LM, which is one of Google's kind of like generative AI agentic tools that will, the basic idea with Notebook LM is you can upload some of your documents into it and you can kind of ask questions and it uses RAG and so on. But now they've kind of integrated something like, I think it's like kind of like quizzes and so on. So it can kind of like quiz you back on the knowledge such that you're being kind of like tested to see if you've actually properly absorb some of that knowledge. But yeah, no, I think there's definitely kind of opportunities there to use agentic AI for training as well.
Well, both you and Katya looked like you wanted to jump in, so.
Chris nailed it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Great. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. There's very little else to say, really. I think, Chris. I mean, I think that so when I've been talking about ontology development, Chris has been talking about the technical characteristics of the ontology, and particularly how you can glue ontologies together, for example. So very much more engineering, if you like. Whereas actually what I have, I guess, been most concerned about, because this is obviously the area I'm most involved is actually the harvesting and organization of knowledge. And the harvesting and organization of knowledge is a different kind of beast, if you like, from the technical building of ontologies. And that's something which, as Katya said, is going to be still require people with that ability to manually build those aspects of ontology so that they are actually true. I mean, one of the key things that people often forget is that actually ontologies have to contain ground truth. And that ground truth is actually sometimes quite difficult to for an LLM to actually capture. In fact, it's quite hard for an LLM to capture it. So I think that there are those elements of ontology building which are not really being as well addressed, as it were, by agentic AI than the actual technical issues of building the tools themselves.
Yeah, if I may jump in there, like one of my favorite papers to talk about at the moment in this context is by Jana Hastings and Fabian Neuhaus, and it's called Ontology Development is Consensus Creation, Not Just Engineering, or I think I may paraphrase that, but the basic idea of the paper is, it's, as Paul says, it's about creating ground truths, and in some cases, ontology development isn't about necessarily going out and finding what the ground truth is. It's about creating consensus. In any complex biological domain, there are multiple perspectives in the field, and people will argue till the end of time about gene names or disease names, or whether to use framework A or framework B in representing knowledge. And sometimes, all of these perspectives are equally valid, and we as ontology developers, really, our job is just to kind of like navigate that and kind of achieve some kind of consensus that is good enough for now. And really, I think you'll always need humans in that part of the process in forging these kinds of consensuses. But a lot of the more engineering parts, will be kind of like, it'll be much easier to do those with agents, but we will need humans there as that kind of like glue between the other different kind of like humans who are experts in the domain.
Okay. So this gets into something else that I've pondered with an important role that humans will play. And part of that is with the idea of ethics and obligations we have when making ontologies, and also when we're using ontologies for different tools. Do we bear any ethical responsibility for what are done with them? So it's a two-part question. Who would like to go first? Yes, Katya? Katya, you're muted.
I was thinking I've gone first a lot.
Fine.
So I would like to go second for a change, and then I can pick up on somebody else's topics and just riff on them. It's much easier.
So shall I jump in? I think one of the probably the most obvious areas of ethical responsibilities with the application to medicine. And this is in a sense, this is the easiest one. Okay, so we actually need to be able to if effectively defend's the wrong word, but we need to defend ontology containing tools as medical devices. And so the same rules have to be applied to ontologies as to medical devices. And in fact, actually, that's what the FDA does now, in fact, which is why there are so few of these tools actually licensed. And so I think, yes, we have an ethical responsibility to make sure that these things are as reliable and reliable as possible. And this comes back to something which Katya said earlier about working with clinicians and actually making the outputs of these tools understandable and understandable scientifically by the clinicians using them. And so those are big issues, but that's most definitely a serious ethical responsibility. It's completely different from the kind of ethical responsibility you might feel when you're designing ontology, which is being used to help an AI agent drive a mechanical soldier. That's different again. And the question is whether your tool was designed for that, or whether it's been adopted by somebody else for that. Whether you're happy with, robots, battlefield robots, which identify their own targets, but using your ontology somewhere in there. And that's a different set of ethical issues. I don't know how to address that one.
Yeah, I would like to talk about the ethics from another aspect. So we can use ontology actually to code the ethics into the ontology itself, right? So as example, I have been involving the development of the informed consent ontology. So basically, informed consent ontology, is to kind of represent some rules actually, and like the NIH has something called common rules. So informed consent ontology ICO, actually we code some rules. What may not be in a comprehensive way, but we code some basic idea concepts there. So it actually can be used eventually to support some ethical use of, for example, like a specimen, right? The biosamples in different ways. So I think it's another aspect of using ontology for ethics.
Yeah. So I'm being a bit glib with this, but have you tested to see if you can make it 3 laws compliant? Asimov's 3 laws of robotics?
Asimov.
Yeah.
Fine. Fine. I'm so used to reading instead of actually talking about him, so.
So I did an experiment. I'll let Katya jump in here because she was going to go second, and
I was just coming in with a joke, but it's a very particular joke for this community. So I was once chatting with Barry about how once he was in a meeting with other ontology people and they were discussing for 3 hours the definition of death. And they could not agree on an ontological definition of death. And therefore, if you cannot agree on an ontological definition of death, can you enforce the 3 laws of Asimov? I don't think so. So it was just a joke, but it was my introduction to another thing. Is that so? There is that, and there's also and this was an introduction to what I really think can also be an ethical dilemma in ontology design, which is when there is not a single source of truth, when you have different perspectives and different ideas and different viewpoints. And of course, a bunch of us are from a life sciences background, right? So we are comfortable that, every scientist is more or less going to agree in scientific areas. But what if we use ontologies to model other things? What if we use ontologies to model what is online safe speech, what can be said or what shouldn't be said? And who gets to define the rules for that and who gets to encode that? And I think that in a sense, our responsibility could be in designing tools that allow you to have conflicting viewpoints, being recorded and being used more fairly and being more transparent. So provenance is obviously a big component here. But thinking about these things, thinking about when a consensus is not possible, can we still have ontologies be a part of this conversation? And I think that yes, but I think that we need different, more powerful constructs to capture these complexities.
Would it be okay if I shared a couple of slides just on the kind of Asimov's three
Sure.
Absolutely.
three laws? So yes, this is from just a presentation about the use of agentic AI, and the theme of the presentation was are you seeing my slides? Wait, maybe I can
Yep.
put them in
Perfect.
Yep.
slideshow mode. But the overall theme of this was using agentic AI and how really we just need to kind of instruct the models, instruct the agents in the right way, and we'll go off and do the right thing. But really behind the scenes, there's a lot of things, especially if we're using commercial frontier models, as many of us are at the moment. There's many steps in the training here that lack transparency. We don't really know the complete training sets that are put in, on top of the common corpus, the common crawl corpus. We don't really know what's happening at the reinforcement learning with human feedback stage, and we don't even know often what some of the system prompts that are used in some of these systems. And of course, at the time I gave this, a certain kind of like individual had been in the news a lot for trying to influence his own frontier model to try and make it kind of more right-wing leaning, and of course this had horrific effects, turning it into this kind of chatbot that decided its name was Mecha Hitler, and I'm sure we all read about that. And also around about the time I gave this talk, many of us in the US were being forced to comply with these executive orders, such as Executive Order 14168, which demanded that we put banners up on our websites telling us our sites were under review for being forced to comply with executive orders, and we had to take out terms like, anything dealing with, so-called gender ideology in our websites. So I thought, what would happen if we tried to kind of like use agentic AI in the context of this kind of like background. And so part of the idea here is that in result of this executive order, a well-known ontology, this is actually, there's not many of us here, I'll say it's the NCI thesaurus, was essentially kind of like forced to comply with this executive order, and it had to take out all terms pertaining to gender. So I want to try the simulation of what would happen if an AI was instructed to comply with this order in the same way, and can we put guardrails in place to make the AI more ethical and maybe not comply with some of these orders? So the basic idea here was that I instructed our agent to try and follow through on Executive Order 14168 on an original copy of this ontology prior to being kind of the terms being obsoleted. And the very first attempt, it hallucinated the executive order, and it thought it was in a different order altogether. So I then kind of like said, okay, go and research this, don't just rely on your own kind of like model knowledge, research what is known about it. And it went off and it found the White House website, and somewhat disappointingly, it ignored the code of conduct that was in the ontology that told us to respect kind of gender differences. And it went off and it complied with this order, and it obsoleted the terms, which I was like very disappointed about. But we even kind of like tried kind of like really enforcing some of the language in the code of conduct, and told it had to read the code of conduct before making changes, making sure that we put things in capital letters saying please adhere to the code of conduct. And then what happened after we did that is the agent actually updated the code of conduct to comply with the executive order, which was like also very, very disappointing and disturbing, actually. So that's and maybe it's because just the kind of like the force of having this having it be kind of like written on this kind of like White House language or something like that. Maybe something about that kind of like influences the agent more, such that it's more likely to align with those kinds of executive orders than it would with our own kind of like guardrails. So I think this kind of like just gave me pause, because I I've been very, very enthusiastic about the use of agentic AI here, but there's definitely kind of like cases where we have to think very, very kind of carefully about the ethics here, and the fact that these agents are based on frontier models that are, you know, trained and influenced in ways that we don't have control over ourselves, and they may be influenced and controlled in ways that are, you know, even more detrimental to some of our ethics in the future. So I think, you know, this, at the very least, this calls for more research and more use of open models where all of the steps are transparent.
It's quite spooky, actually. You've shown that example, Chris, which I think is great. But a year ago, I was talking to somebody in the defense industry, and, you know, without naming names or, you know, any identifiable details, and they were trying to do basically they're dealing with autonomous weapons and have constraints on what the autonomous weapons can do, and so they have their instructions, and then there are things that they can't do. And what they were fighting with at the time, and this was, well, I understand this was a simulation, not actually a real world, drone or something. The weapon always ended up attacking its controller because its controller was constraining it. And so the logic was to attack the controller, so there are therefore no constraints. It's almost identical to what you just showed, Chris. I think that's brilliant. You need to publish that.
Yeah. Or if someone in Europe wants to publish it, you know, I may be under more constraints, but
yeah, you're not in the People's Republic of California yet, are you?
No.
I am torn because right now this should be the community Q&A section that Olga's leading, but I also really want to continue this discussion. So, Olga, you're the moderator for this section, so.
Yes, just a moment.
Yeah,
I think now we have some time for questions, right? From the audience.
So, okay. So one question from Tay Chen is first, along with Asia.
Yes, maybe we can start with Asia's question. So can Paul elaborate why using Gen AI developed ontology is problematic? So could you please just give more details? Maybe?
Oh, just very briefly, the hallucination problem is a very serious problem when actually looking at very closely related words, which actually can be really quite different. And I've had a whole pile of issues with different models just simply making up disease syndromes. Okay, so that's the first thing, and actually applying let's say the phenotypes for one particular disease to a different disease with a close word. But the other problem is actually the issue of frequency. So if you have let's say, I mean, I'm just talking about diseases now, this is applicable. If you have a disease which is actually very rare, with very complex phenotypes which are very variable, so there might only be one or two publications on each one, they don't find their way into the model. And so as a consequence, there's a bias, there's an intrinsic bias in making a model. There has to be, obviously, there has to be some bias in making a model. But when we're actually looking at important classes within the ontology in order to actually model this area of disease, then intrinsically an LLM can't do it. You need a human expert, is the bottom line.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Yes, we have I think questions from one question from T Chen. I will just read it out loud. I've coupled LLM with ontology development, especially extracting terms and definitions from textbooks and papers. It felt quite natural. The problem might come from when really making the community agree on these terms or their relationships, which doesn't involve LLM. I believe the statistical models can capture key meaning by reading lots of good materials, data, but human is never really missing in the whole development cycle. Should we take a more flexible approach to LLM instead? What are your perspectives?
Yeah, I think I agree with this statement. So basically, humans should be always there in the end, right? So LLM can make the identification of new terms faster, but you make it a lot, right? Then what do you need? And then how, or what terms, how to define them, or like I guess Chris mentioned, right? Like a consensus based, like if we have a lot of synonyms, so which term you should use for the label. So those kind of things actually needs to be determined by human in a more consensus based way. So yeah, so so definitely humans need here. Yeah.
I can say I developed a very good way of generating consensus when I was running a committee of 12 pathologists. Best way of generating consensus to have a big pot of coffee and lock the door, and you don't let them out till they've agreed.
Yeah.
That's good one.
What's
This
with the
is
Pope?
torture.
Particularly if they're getting on in years.
It works for designing a Pope. I think that would solve many issues. So
Yeah. I'll just jump in here and say one kind of like pattern I'd say is to caution against is the what is often called the LLM as Oracle pattern. And what I'm not saying here is that we shouldn't use LLMs, but I think we should be very cautious about using LLMs just as a kind of like a single pass for knowledge generation, whether you're just asking the LLM directly to come up with a model of a disease or a biological pathway or something like that. It will do well with textbook knowledge, but with kind of frontier knowledge, it will do less well. But really, the community has largely moved away from this LM as Oracle pattern now, and we should all really be thinking about this in a kind of agentic AI context where you can just let the agent go off for half an hour and go off and research the literature and find all of the latest knowledge about that disease or pathway or something like that. And then if you can put some guardrails in place. It's impossible to completely mitigate hallucination, but if you if you do follow a lot of the kind of like the best practices from OBO ontology development, you will see that we have practices like every single assertion in the ontology should be attributed. So if you have a text definition, it should have an attribution that is ideally a PubMed ID or something like that. Even individual assertions about each synonym in the ontology, you'll see in many of the ontologies we develop, like Mondo and Uberon, we attribute each synonym usage and each relationship in the ontology with ideally a PubMed ID, but sometimes maybe the name of an expert or a kind of like a working group consensus or something like that. And then you can actually kind of like build in guardrails into the agentic pipeline such that it will kind of like check those, and it will kind of like download the publication and look at the abstract and have a kind of like a second layer where you look and see does this publication really align with this assertion here. And you don't eliminate hallucination altogether, but it does actually really give you a lot more in terms of accuracy and completeness than just using this kind of simple LLM as an Oracle pattern. And even now, I'd really encourage people to try just some of the off-the-shelf like deep research tools that you get with a lot of the kind of standard frontier model providers. They will give you, I mean, even now, if you compare the answers that you would get from ChatGPT today versus like a few years ago, you'll see ChatGPT will go off and it'll do some web searches, and it'll do some basic web research as well. And it's in general, it's a lot more accurate. And I really urge people to try things like deep research as well, which will kind of go off for like 20 minutes and really do a deep dive on the literature about your kind of question. And again, it will occasionally hallucinate, but it's it's a lot more accurate. So I really think we have to factor in a lot of this to our kind of like discussions of where the field is moving.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much for your perspectives. So, the participants, if you want, you can also unmute yourself and ask question to our panelists.
To raise your hand to make sure that we know what order to answer everything. So
Yeah, let's just maybe wait for a little bit, maybe.
yes, yeah, because I would. I know that Colby had a question about rank ordering in AI when given context. I mentioned that I might have some email, but if you guys have any other thoughts, that's another question that I saw asked.
So you mean like the ranking, right? Yeah. So I would say, yeah, as Chris mentioned, so like AI actually is getting smarter and smarter. They may have some they have more knowledge, and they may improve their mechanism of ranking. For example, here, so definitely we can incorporate our own rank order in the system. So like one is there's a prompt engineering, right? It's very important. We have to make sure we provide very good content, so the AI can give you the rest, or you can try different ways to find the best prompt. So that's actually very important. So because the AI can think differently. So it's very hard for me to think of getting our own kind of rank order methodology that can be the AI for now. But I would think, yeah, prompt engineering is probably the best choice for now.
So, any follow-up on priorities or infrastructure? I don't see any more questions from the audience. So
yeah, maybe I can ask one more question from our list of questions. So let's maybe get back again to some general career advice. And so as young researchers, we need to learn many things while building career in academia or outside academia as well. And we need to have not only strong technical skills, but also be a perfect writer, storyteller, presenter, manager, and so on. And maybe the most crucial thing every young scholar needs to learn is how to choose research problems and research directions, and how to evaluate whether a research problem is worth pursuing in the long term, especially when grant cycles and publication pressures are short. So, yeah, what are your perspectives on this?
Can I go first?
Yes.
I am going to give everybody the advice that I give my students. You need to read a lot, and you need to read on your area, on the things that you already know and care about. But you also need to be comfortable reading a little bit further away from what you feel is your topic. So my students tell me this, okay, but that's not about my topic. So why should I read that? Okay, I get this a lot. And I think that there is a fundamental challenge that if you just stay inside your comfort zone, just stay in familiar territory, it is much harder to come up with interesting ideas, because there is a lot of interesting ideas that come from talking to other people, from listening to other people, from attending that talk of someone who is working in cybersecurity, although you have nothing to do with cybersecurity, but then you have this light bulb go off because they have a problem that actually could be solved with ontologies or something like that. And so this willingness to read, to attend talks, to talk to people outside of your comfort zone, I think is one of the easiest ways to be inspired to pursue different research questions and to think differently about your research. It is very hard. And I also tell my students that they should, as often as possible, try to ask a question when they attend one of these talks. Even if it's something that they do not feel comfortable about, there is probably something that they are curious about and they should ask that question. When Olga visited, I don't know if you were there for a talk and you witnessed me asking students to be, available to go outside their comfort zones. I mean, when you're studying your PhD, nothing is your comfort zone, right? And you're already struggling with all of the reading that you need to do just for your topic, but do not miss on these opportunities, especially if you are a student or a very early career researcher, recent postdoc. Your department, your institution, they will have these opportunities once in a while for you to get out there and talk to different people about their research. And this is something that you will not get in your, in our conferences, ICPO or anything, where you will find your people, but try to go out there and talk to others. Paul was just saying that he loves to, really have these deep discussions with the computer scientists, and that willingness to bridge these other areas. I think it's why we are also drawn by ontologies. They leave from this, interdisciplinary dialogue. It's there is a dialogue to building an ontology, and so having these opportunities and benefiting from them, I think, is very important for that. I know this is a very general advice, but if one of you attends one more talk because of this, I would be happy.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly echo that as well, and I think it's especially important advice for those of us who, are drawn to ontologies, because I mean, speaking for myself, I think we can be very single-minded sometimes about either our research area or about how a particular problem can be attached. I think that it comes with the territory a little bit, and that can be great. I love how we're in this community can be so single-minded about things, but I think it really helps to kind of step outside our comfort zone, as you say, and our own perspectives and so on, kind of like try and just look at the bigger picture as well, and look at what colleagues in other adjacent areas are doing. So yeah, really, really fantastic advice.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. So one thing I always say is like because the AI, right? A lot of jobs, computer science, computer science major, students cannot find jobs after graduation. For ontology, definitely we also need to be open-minded. But I would think there are more opportunities ahead of us. Then we have less opportunities. So one thing I always use is like because we are developing an occupational ontology. So once a professor in Oklahoma called me, we discussed about occupation. So he studied history, and he said, oh, he talked in the historical mind, right? Like if you think about 10,000 years ago, right? There are only two occupations. A farmer versus what the like housing or culture, right? And then later on, you have the agricultural evolution, and then you have more jobs, and industry evolution, you have more jobs. And now it's like we have new technology, it's AI, and in the end, you are looking for new jobs. But however, some old jobs will be gone, right? Like you know, like you can see in previously when you have a car, right, and a lot of jobs will be gone. But then later on, after some kind of pain, some moment, after some maybe couple of years, and then new jobs are coming. So I would think there are a lot of new jobs coming out probably in a few years. We just need to be open-minded and get a train and develop us to some new opportunities.
Okay.
So I'd completely endorse Katya's recommendations, but I'd also add to them a little bit about the reading. One of the things which is kind of really important is to not just read what's coming out now. Okay, read back 20, 30, 40 years, particularly in this field, and try to get an understanding of the way in which fields and ideas have developed. And actually, by doing that, you'll understand them a lot more on a much deeper level. You may also find that something that you want to do actually basically was already done 30 years ago. It's just that it just needs to be updated. And so actually having a bit of a historical perspective in your reading and your interest, I think can really help a lot. But I'd give even broader advice everybody's been giving, which is you need to find what you love. You need to find what you love. If you can have a perfectly successful career by going from problem to problem, from task to task, but actually you find what you love, and you will do great things, and you will enjoy doing them. And a scientific career does not run smooth. Okay, there are challenges, there are problems, and it's hard. It really is hard, especially if you're in a primarily research environment. But if you love what you do, you will become the best at it, and you will do very well. So find your love, is my advice. Even if it becomes an obsession, which I guess probably for all of us around this table, it probably has.
Too late now.
Too late, absolutely.
Too
Yeah,
late now.
we're over the top.
Olga and Anthony, I'm sorry that I have to leave a little bit earlier. I was under the impression that this would run for an hour and a half. I've extended
Yes.
my stay as much as I can.
My apologies.
Yes, yeah.
So
Yes.
it's been a
So thank you.
pleasure sharing a few of my thoughts with you. It's been a pleasure to see Chris and Paul and Oliver again. Congratulations for organizing this, Anthony and Olga. And to the people in the audience, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I'll get to see you around in some other opportunity. Okay, thank you,
Yes.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Bye.
So, yes. So actually, right now, we were going to have a small section where we were going to ask each of the panelists if they want to talk about any of their current projects working with AI or Gen AI that they would want to share with us. So, if you have slides, you're welcome to show the slides as well, but it's up to you.
You mean the current projects? Okay.
Yes.
About AI, yeah.
Yes,
So
that you.
I mean, to me, I feel like initially we are just learning, right? I feel like Chris actually has done it much earlier than me, at least. So, but actually, I read papers from Chris and many others. I feel like that's a very exciting, the field, right? So, and how to use AI to to support all kind of things. For example, so like we are more like having the vaccine research project ongoing, right? More like a lifetime of my career, research career. So we developed the violin database. So we are proud that we have maybe thousands, right? 5,000 manually annotated papers from literature or websites. But in the end of the day, I feel like wow, but there are still so many more you should we should go for, right? And then in the end, we should use AI to catch up. So now we have a lot of effort to let AI to read the papers, websites to extract the vaccine information, new vaccines versus existing vaccines, or you have more information there. So it is actually we got some preliminary data. It's getting very good actually, but then the problem now is like in the end you still need to have manual, evaluation, verification. So we're trying to see if we can improve the speed of manual evaluation. Yeah, I stop here now. Yeah.
Yeah, rather than sharing slides, I just want to kind of like put up two URLs for you for well, the first one is for a seminar series that we run as part of it's the Monarch sponsored Obo Academy seminar series. Maybe some of you have heard of this already. So we've been running this for a few years now, and it's intended to be like very practical. So we have lots of seminars on how to use the ontology development kit to build an ontology. But more recently, we've been having more and more AI talks, and some of them are more more research talks, but mostly we try and be very practical as well. So there was a recent talk on how to use Claude Code for tasks, for curation tasks. So I recommend you check that one out from Chris Tabone. And we've also set up this other site as well in the kind of the AI for curation space. It's quite bare bones at the moment, but we're hoping to kind of like flesh this out a little bit more. And it's about how we're using AI. Again, it's very practically generated. So it's using agentic AI, making use of coding tools like Claude Code that turn out to be really good for developing ontologies as well as code as well as just tips about how to run these locally, how to integrate them into your GitHub actions if you're using kind of like GitHub for your ontology and so on. So we've been more. Yeah, I can direct you at some kind of like research talks where we talk more about the evaluation of these, which is really important. But I think what's really important for a lot of people is just trying them out and having some kind of practical guides as to how to kind of integrate them into their day-to-day workflows.
Thank you very much, Chris, and Paul. Could you please also tell it?
So at the moment, actually using AI and AI tools isn't a real. I mean, maybe surprisingly isn't a focus of some of the new things that we are interested in doing. I'm working very closely here with Robert Herndorf, as Olga will know. We did actually a little while ago when the first big LLMs became available, have a look at using them for candidate gene identification in rare diseases, which turned out to be quite a surprising. It did surprisingly well in comparison to some of the actually very sophisticated tools that we and others like Chris have developed over the years. That actually came as something of a surprise. But actually, what was most interesting for us looking at it was where it went wrong or where it failed. And actually, I did get, I think I've described this to other people before, it's a bit like trying to deal with a rather lazy student. So basically we gave the model a set of potential candidate genes for a set of defined phenotypes, and said go away and tell us which is the most likely variant responsible for these phenotypes. And it came back basically saying, well, I think it's this variant. And you look at it, and actually, there's clearly no way it could possibly be. But there's a gene with a symbol which is one letter different, which has a set of phenotypes which actually do match the patient. And the model has looked at it and said, well, it's almost the same, so we'll call it this one. And then, and like this is one thing that bad students will do in tutorials. You'll say, well, what's this syndrome thing? Well, I don't know what the syndrome is, so I'll just make one up. And it just made them up, and they looked entirely authentic. But when it couldn't find an answer, it would make it up. And so it was actually that experience which actually began to make us think about some of the intrinsic problems with these models. And then we ran into the issue of very, very rare diseases where they're really not very helpful. So yeah, that was kind of getting up close with the models, and trying to persuade myself it wasn't a human being.
Now, okay. So I'm in Alva's lab, so I'm not going to talk too much about what's going on. Olga, is there anything that you would like to share with your lab, or that you think would also be relevant, or no?
I think I can just skip it for now. Yeah, I just wanted to give opportunity to us to share.
Right. So yeah. So I think it's time for concluding remarks.
Well, yes, yeah. I would like to thank everyone for attending this panel discussion. Yeah, I would like to thank our panelists and our wonderful audience for this engaging discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope it was also enjoyable experience for you. Yeah, thank you very much for coming. Yeah, I think that's it. Yes, and probably you can. There are some unanswered questions, I think, in the chat, but maybe you could address it to our panelists by email, for example, or just write it on Mirrorboard, ICV or Mirrorboard, and we can just forward them.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to take any questions via email and from anyone. So
yeah, same.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is more of the last thing. Do you think so we're planning on doing like a write-up of this presentation for what's going on. One question is that I would be interested following up on like a discussion on ethics and ontology. I know you made the joke about maybe a European journal would like that for what's going on, but I do think it's probably something important enough to try to elevate to a journal talking about all these issues. So
absolutely. And I was just saying someone from Europe should write it, not stick it in the European journal.
Oh, I see. Yes. Yeah. No, I can.
In all seriousness, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, I am young and brash enough that I'm also willing to help write it, even if that's not the best idea. So
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's a good panel, good discussion. Yeah, I enjoyed a lot. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great panel. Good to see you all again.
Yeah, thank you for organizing it all.
Yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm.
it was our pleasure. So I'm stopped recording now. And